Hey y'all, today we're doing the 7.6 double angle and half angle formulas. Again, I won't make you memorize these, so let's jump in and try to use them. So this first one is find the exact value of sine, that we know the sine of theta equals 3/5, and this is between pi over 2 and pi. And so that is in our second quadrant. But for part A, we're wanting to know what is sine 2 theta. If we go look up above, sine 2 theta is the formula 2 sine theta cosine theta. So we're going to go and plug in. We need to figure out then what cosine theta equals in this triangle. Oh, this was in the second quadrant. So here's our triangle. The sine is 3/5. This is a 3, 4, 5 special triangle. So that means cosine is 4/5. So I'm going to write that over here. Cosine theta equals 4/5. And remember it's negative because of that -4. Alright, so we're just going to plug in our values. So 2, the sine theta is 3/5. And cosine theta is -4/5. When I multiply these together, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times -4 is -24. And 5 times 5 is 25. And that's it. Okay, now let's look at cosine 2 theta. So for cosine 2 theta, you can use any of these formulas. They all will do cosine 2 theta. So let's just use the 1 minus 2 sine squared theta. So 1 minus 2. The sine of theta is 3/5, and then it's squared because of this squared here. Squared, squared. So we have 1 minus 2 times 9/25. Then this would equal 9/25 times 2 is 18. And 1 would be 25 over 25 minus 18 over 25, which equals 7 over 25. That's it. Okay. Next we have solve for sine theta, cosine theta, and it equals -1/2. So sine theta, we're gonna just start solving for what this is. And I'm gonna start by multiplying both sides by 2, this denominator here. So then I would get 2 sine theta cosine theta equals -1. I'm recognizing now that we are looking at 2 sine theta cosine theta, which is our double angle formula for sine 2 theta. So I'm going to replace it. Sine 2 theta equals -1. Or we can write this as the inverse. So we can write this as sine inverse of -1 equals 2 theta. So from here, we ask ourselves, okay, when does sine equal -1? And that's at 3 pi over 2, and that still equals 2 theta. And then now solve for theta by multiplying both sides by, dividing both sides by 2. So I end up with theta equals 3 pi over 4. And then this is in between 0 and 2 pi, so we don't have to create a reoccurring formula. Okay, next we're going to look at the half angle formulas. So we're just going to practice them. Again, I won't make you memorize these. And of course, you guessed it, we're going to try and use angles from our unit circle to help us with these. So looking at cosine 15, we're told use half angle identity. So you always, when you're told to use the half angle identity, you always multiply the angle you were given by 2. So cosine 15 is also the cosine of 30 divided by 2, which is now your half angle. So the angle we're working with is that 30. Now we're going to go and plug it in this formula. So we have this cosine theta over 2, cosine 30 over 2. So theta is 30. So we have plus minus the square root of 1 plus cosine 30 over 2. Since 15 degrees is in quadrant 1, we know that cosine is positive in quadrant 1, so we get rid of the negative. And then the cosine of 30 is root 3 over 2. So this is 1 plus root 3 over 2 over 2. This is all square rooted. I'm going to multiply by this denominator in the top because I don't want the fraction. So when I do that, I get 2 plus square root 3 over 4. This is all square rooted. And then in the denominator, I have 4. And the square root of 4 is 2. So this equals the square root of 2 plus square root 3 over 2. Okay, now let's do B. We have sine of 22.5. So take 22.5, times it by 2, and we get 45. So the sine of 45, negative 45 over 2. And we're going to plug it into our formula. So plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of negative 45 over 2. And then negative 22.5 is in quadrant 4. And in quadrant 4, sine is negative. So we're going to get rid of the positive. So the cosine of negative 45, or if you would go to negative 45, is the same value as 7 pi over 4. So that is root 2 over 2. So 1 minus the square root of 2 over 2 divided by 2. We're going to do the same thing of multiply by that denominator that's in the numerator and get 2 minus square root 2 over 4. And then the square root of 4, and remember this is negative, is 2. So we get 2 minus square root 2. And that's all for that one. Okay, now let's practice with tangent. So again, we're just going to multiply by 2, even though it's radians. So 9 pi times 2 is 18 pi over 8. And then if I simplify 18 pi over 8, I get 9 pi over 4, which is all the way around the unit circle and back to the first quadrant. So 9 pi over 4 is the same angle as pi over 4. Okay, so I'm going to plug it into that formula for tan pi over 4 divided by 2. So that would be 1 minus the cosine of pi over 4 over 1 plus the cosine of pi over 4. And that's square rooted. And again, it's plus or minus, but tangent, pi over 4 is in our first quadrant, and tangent is positive. So we're going to use the positive. So I'm going to find my values. So cosine pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. I don't want those fractions, so I'm going to multiply by the denominator. Let me shrink this piece. Okay. So I end up with 2 minus square root 2 over 2 plus square root 2, all in the square root. And then I'm going to end up multiplying by my conjugate because I can't have a square root in the bottom. So when I do this, I should get 2 minus square root 2 over root 2. Again, can't have that radical in the bottom, so I'm going to multiply by the square root of 2. And then lastly, I end up with 2 root 2 minus 2 over 2. And this can be even simplified further by dividing by that 2, and I would get the square root of 2 minus 1. And that's my final answer here. Okay. So next, we're going to find the exact value if we know that the cosine of theta equals negative 3/5, and we're between pi and 3 pi over 2, which means we're in quadrant 3. So the first one we're finding is sine theta over 2. So we're using that half angle formula for sine, which is the square root of 1 minus cosine theta over 2, and it's plus or minus. And we are going to have, our answer is going to be positive because in quadrant, because in this quadrant, we're actually, if it's pi over 2, we're gonna have, we have pi theta 3 pi over 2, but we're dividing by 2, so we're gonna divide everything by 2. So we would end up with 3 pi over 4. So between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 4, that's in quadrant 2, which sign is positive. So we're gonna have the positive. Now we're just going to plug in our value. So 1 minus the cosine theta was negative 3/5 over 2 square rooted. And then I would have 1 plus 3/5 over 2 square rooted. Can't have that fraction, so I'm going to multiply by the denominator and get 5 plus 3 over 10 square roots, which is the square root of 8 over 10, which if I simplify this and get my radical out of the denominator, I get 2 root 5 over 5. Okay, now looking at cosine theta divided by 2. So I'm using that 1 plus cosine theta divided by 2. So 1 plus cosine theta divided by 2. And we know cosine theta is negative 3/5, so I'm going to plug it in. So 1 plus negative 3/5 over 2 square rooted. And then again, I had to do this same, check my restrictions with the new theta divided by 2. And I'm still in that same spot then, but in that second quadrant, cosine is negative. So we're gonna have the negative version of this. Okay, so keep simplifying this and we should get negative square roots 1 minus 3/5 over 2. And then we have multiply by the 5. So we have 5 minus 3 over 10 square root, which is 2 over 10, the square root. Simplify, get that radical out of the denominator, and I should get negative square root 5 over 5. All right, last one, tan theta over 2. We're going to go through the same steps. So let's write down the formula. 1 minus cosine theta over 1 plus cosine theta square rooted. So that gives me, and tangent in second quadrant is negative. So negative 1 minus 3/5 over 1 plus negative 3/5. And then I'm going to simplify. So negative 1 plus 3/5 on the top now, and 1 minus 3/5 on the bottom. That's all square rooted. Don't want that fraction, so multiply by the denominator and get negative 5 plus 3 over 5 minus 3, which is negative 8 over 2, which simplify, get the radical. So negative 8 divided by 2 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2.